Uh, Hey everybody, I'm Emma and I'm here with Brittany and she's going to walk us through Sanborn maps. But let's just go over a couple pieces of housekeeping really quickly. We'll do a Q&A at the end, so just save your questions till the very end. Again, this is more of like a general overview of Sanborn maps, so we can't necessarily answer questions on like your home or your building, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. I am recording this and I will put it on YouTube and email it out to everybody later this week. So if you have to hop off, not a big problem. And then please stay muted with your microphone off. We've got about 115 people in here right now. So really quickly, Backlog is the name of my company. We're an archival consulting firm, and we're who's putting on this webinar today. We do archival needs assessments. So coming in, figuring out, like what your needs are, like, do we need an archivist? Do we need to outsource some stuff? We can go through that. We do some policy writing. So if you need a collections management plan or something like that. And then we also do some digitization projects. And I'm Emma. I founded Backlog in 2021. Before that, I worked as a university archivist. And before that, I worked in genealogy reference. And from here, I'm going to hand it over to Brittany.
Hi all, I'm Brittany. So I've been working in libraries and archives for over 10 years now. I've been working in many different archives and libraries, including municipal, academic, corporate archives, and so on. And so I consider myself a bit of a Jill of all trades, as a little fun thing there. And I will be getting into the usage of Sanborn maps today. So next slide, please. Just as a bit of an overview of what this webinar will entail, I'm going to go over a brief history of Sanborn maps, then how they are used, where you can find them, finding a specific location, and using the Sanborn key, as well as reading a map. And I'm going to go over 3 case studies to show you how I use Sanborn maps. So next slide, please. So a bit of background on Sanborn maps. Sanborn maps are a fire insurance map. The origins of insurance maps trace back to the late 18th century London, where fire insurance companies and underwriters needed reliable and detailed records of properties that they covered and ones that they may cover. So in response, these intricate building by building maps were created. They capture valuable data that extended far beyond these insurance needs, though. George T. Hope of New York City is considered the godfather of the fire insurance map industry here in the United States, because he had created a committee for creating a map of this New York City, and this committee established the format and symbols adopted by subsequent map companies. So the symbols and formats that you see is all thanks to George T. Hope. You may come across the Hope Paris map of New York City that was created in 1852, if you're ever doing any research on that city. And that was created in partnership with William Paris, which you will hear his name again later. So I just want to point that out. And now today, these maps offer detailed documentation and rich insights of a variety of fields, including genealogy, environmental research, urban development, and more. So now to get into the Sanborn map fire insurance company. Sanborn was one of the largest and most prolific companies that was creating fire insurance maps of the day. They covered about 12,000 US cities and towns, and from 1867 and up to about the 1960s, fire insurance maps were created for many areas. However, by the late 20th century, they became obsolete when insurance companies moved to other means of underwriting their policies. So you will not see these maps after about the 1960s, 70s. The Sanborn Company's origins come from when D.A. Sanborn worked as a surveyor in 1866 for J.B. Bennett of the Atena Fire Insurance Company, who had hired Sanborn to survey towns in Tennessee. Soon after, Sanborn saw this would be a flourishing industry in the future, so he decided to establish the D.A. Sanborn National Insurance Diagram Bureau. Some of his earliest maps were of Boston and New York City. You may also come across the company having other names other than the Sanborn National Insurance Diagram Bureau, mainly due to various mergers and company changes, but also because that's kind of a tongue twister, as you just heard me say. So you might also see it called the Sanborn Paris Map Company, as well as the Sanborn Map Company. So while Sanborn became the most prolific and synonymous company with fire insurance maps, there were other map companies of the day. It may be helpful for you in your research to look at these other companies to see if there's any gaps in Sanborn's coverage. These other maps include the Paris and Brown of that Hope Paris that I had named before that was in business from 1852 to 1889. This was before Sanborn then acquired the company and included it into the Sanborn Paris Map Company name I had mentioned a moment ago. Another map company, Hexamer.
Are you aware the slides are not advancing?
I am not, yes, I have not gotten to a next slide yet. I'm still going over the history here, but thank you for pointing it out. So I'm just giving you a brief history right now. I didn't need any visuals for this one. So another map company that was also purchased by Sanborn in 1916 was the Hexamer and Sons of Philadelphia. You may also come across the G.M. Hopkins and Co., G.W. Bromley and Co., and the Atana Fire Insurance Company. All these I say just so you know that it's not just Sanborn that produced these insurance maps. It was all these other companies. So don't just pigeonhole your research into just Sanborn, because there may be other things that were covered by other companies, including local companies and other regional insurance companies. All right, now to the next slide. So when you're using Sanborn maps, it may be tricky to determine the date of the page you're looking at, especially for maps of the 20th century. Beginning around 1920, corrected editions were issued as a cheaper option by Sanborn as they were going through some financial issues at the day. These corrected issues were paste-on correction slips that were then glued on top of an older map to show changes in a building or block. Initially, Sanborn correctors would come in and then add the date of the correction on that page. But as time went on, it became harder and harder to keep that up. And so it was harder then to determine the date of each correction. Usually when you're using Sanborn maps online, namely through the Library of Congress website, which I'll get to in a moment, when you're using these online, they will likely have a label for the map with a date range. And this date range usually includes the first date of the original, as well as all the way up to the last date of the last correction that you can find. So keep that in mind. If you see a date range in your research, that is why. It's because there was correction proofs on top of the originals. Whereas if you're using a physical book, you will also need to pay attention to see if there are corrected slips put on and pasted onto the page. You can determine that by looking to see if a building looks almost raised above the page as it was pasted on. You can then determine the latest date that is reflected in the book by looking at the various corrected record charts, as I've shown here from a Sanborn map. You can see that there was a corrected proof in 41, 45, 46, and so on. And they tell you the revision number and of the page, as well as the date of the correction. Next slide. So I just told you a little bit of history of Sanborn maps, and now you might be asking yourself, why should we be using them? And how is it important? So it's really important to first remind ourselves when we're using these maps that they were created with a specific purpose in mind, namely money. So this context is important when interpreting the maps, since they reflect certain information, but not necessarily other information. Namely, they focus more on urban and more dense areas. Some buildings were also skimmed, since they were of less interest to the insurers. Commercial, public, factory, or other large usages were usually emphasized and given more details, whereas lower income and marginalized communities will be harder to track through these maps, unfortunately. However, despite their limitations, these maps can be useful for studying the urbanization of America, historical research of urban geography, property research, genealogy, and historic preservation. I will be touching upon many of these uses in my case studies later. They can also tell us things such as the owner of a building, the materials used, the building usage, property boundaries, and building designs and layouts. They can be used in conjunction with town directories, local and state newspapers, Google, of course, and local historical websites to learn about the people who actually owned or lived in the buildings. So to help convey how to use the maps and how they can be useful for you, I'm actually going to walk you through the history of my hometown with my 3 case studies. My hometown is called Hopedale, Massachusetts. When I was creating this webinar, I was actually debating about what place to use for my examples, since I had actually used a lot of Sanborn maps for years to help me with producing histories of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cambridge is a very big city, and I thought that, well, why don't I choose my hometown, because it could be an interesting dive into a less populated area. And so I ultimately did decide to do that, which I'll get to in a moment, so that you can see that even lesser known areas can be researched using Sanborn maps. As I go through this webinar, you will see some sprinklings of Cambridge examples also in here. And that's mainly to show the difference of what a rural map versus a more common populated map could look like, and to familiarize yourself with the different looks and feels of different maps that were produced by the same company. So next slide, please. So to walk you through the process from the start to the beginning, we have to start with actually finding a map. So where can you find them? There's typically 3 main ways that you'll likely be able to find Sanborn maps for your research. The first option you can do from anywhere, which is fantastic. It is the Library of Congress Geography and Map Division's website for Sanborn maps. You can see a screenshot that I took of the main search bar for the Library of Congress's page, and they have digitized over 51,000 maps that are arranged by state and then city and release date. Most of the examples that I will be including here in the webinar are from the Library of Congress digitized collection, and I took screenshots and snippets from those, so you'll see those. The next option is to check out your closest major city's library, because they might have a special map collection, such as for me, the city of Boston has a collection of fire insurance and real estate atlases at the Boston Public Library. Checking this resource can be really helpful for you because while the Library of Congress has a huge collection, they don't have everything that's out there. And this can be a way for you to see if there's other Sanborn maps that weren't digitized by the Library of Congress, or you could see if there's other fire insurance companies that have produced content about your area. As I had mentioned before, I named some of those big ones, but there's even more for regional fire insurance maps that you can find at your local library, likely. And then finally, your town. Your town's library could also have some of the maps. They could have been gathered from, they could have been donated from insurance companies that no longer need them, or could have been gathered from other ways. And so your town might have hyper-local maps about your area, as well as they would likely have things such as like a city or town directory or a registry of books of things that would come out around the same years that you could be looking for, which I actually use in my case studies later. So next slide. So going over that kind of basic how to get to a map, now you have to determine, is this map going to be helpful for you? So I'm going to be going over the list of these items that are listed here to review, for you to review before determining if a map is helpful for you or not. These will be including introductory material, block numbering, and graphic indices, street index, special index, and graphic map of volume index. So next slide. So just start off with introductory material. Introductory material is really important and can provide insight into the development of urban America. Most larger cities will have a title page, as you see on the left, which is from Cambridge from 1900, and then subsequently would have one or more pages of indices and sometimes full reports on the conditions of the area. You can see the intricately designed title page of Cambridge here. Because it was a more populated city, they put more effort into it. And so they then also, if you had turned to the next page, which obviously you can't do virtually right here, but you would then see the index. Whereas on the left side, on the right side, you will see a smaller area of Milford, including Hopedale. These smaller areas would likely have the introductory material on that first page, as well as a bunch of other stuff. They kind of just would bring it all together to make it more concise and easy to produce something for a smaller area. So it is all squeezed in there. Don't worry, I am going to zoom in a moment on all the different components, so you're not looking at just little tiny little things. You'll see it in a bigger scale in a moment. But I just want to point out that this Milford introductory page, this is the first of 13 pages in a volume versus Cambridge's 88. So next slide, please. So zooming in on the top right corner of that map that I was just talking about for Milford, I'm going to walk you through this introductory material for Hopedale. You'll see it says Milford, including Hopedale, from November 1897. If you zoom in even further into the introductory information, this actually tells you about the population of Milford, including the smaller town of Hopedale, which was about 11,000 at the time. And I'm going to address the big thing here. Why, you might be wondering, why is a Sanborn volume of only 13 pages going to shove Hopedale into this bigger town of Milford's area map instead of allowing it to have its own map at the time? Well, here's where I'm going to get into just a little bit of town history. I won't delve too deep into this because that's not really what this is about, but this is kind of a fun little way for you to kind of get a story through the maps. So by choosing my hometown, this is where it gets interesting. The Hopedale was originally a subsection of Milford, so already you'd be like, oh, well, maybe that's just why. It was called the Dale, which was established in the 1840s by a reverend named Aidan Ballou, and it was established, which is, I think, really cool, but it was established as a utopian commune. It started with about 32 people signing the original constitution, but as what often had happened with these rare communes, is that by the 1850s, the commune had failed and became a mill town that was owned and bought up by the Draper family. However, a lot of the original social sentiments had remained at the time. So by 1886, so about 20 years later, Hopedale was decided to officially incorporate after wanting to separate from Milford for its morally corrupt activities, which is essentially just that they like to imbibe in alcohol, which Hopedale seemed to not like at the time. So here we can see that our earliest Sanborn map that we have available was created 11 years after its incorporation. So with that kind of idea in mind, you can now know that this is the earliest look of a newly developed independent town that had decided to separate from a bigger town. I also did some digging into the census records of the 1890 census, which you can do when you're looking at your maps. You can look at the census records of around the same time. So the 1890 census was 7 years prior to this 1897 map. And doing some quick math, Hopedale was about 1/7 of the size of Milford in its residency. So keeping in mind then the 11,000 I had mentioned prior, you can kind of do the math of like what that the size difference is and what's included. So you're kind of now building a bit of a story about what was going on at the time. You also, census records, at least for general demographic stuff can also be found for our today dates. So I was able to find out that while it was 1/7 back in the time of the 1890s, nowadays it's still about 1/7 the size. So they both kind of had a rate of development and expansion that occurred pretty simultaneously between the two towns. So keeping that in mind for the future, when I get to some more stuff about the town, this is kind of how it works to look at a map and pull in other points of information from other sources, and you kind of start learning a bit more about how things all kind of come together and how the story can really bring itself out from all these different sources. But to go back to reading that introductory material, oftentimes you'll still learn a bit more about how towns approach their fire department duties. Milford would make sense that they actually had more stable fire department. They had like full-time staff, full-time horses for fire needs, whereas Hopedale, it was all just volunteer-based, and people would volunteer their horses for the needs. So that's all included here in that introductory material. And by reading this, you now are starting to know a little bit more about the water and utilities and the fire needs of these areas that were available to a town. And that can help you discern the level of development in the area. Obviously, Milford was bigger. It was more developed at the time. So then it makes sense that the fire department needs would be bigger than Hopedale, which was working with Milford at the time. I did some more research, but at the time they still hadn't fully developed their own fire stuff. So that kind of blends well more with the story of that Hopedale was still kind of finding its independence at the time. So next slide, please. All right, next we have block numbering. This block numbering and graphic index that you see here was at the top left of the introductory page from the map that I chose. The graphic index shows the sections covered by a set of sheets or pages in a Sanborn map volume. You'll see here that the colored boxes mark which area is covered by each sheet, and they have a different number for each one. But it can also show you which areas aren't covered at a glance. Like in the middle bottom section, there is a whole neighborhood that's between Forest Street and Cemetery Street. Those were not uncovered in this map. So here's where you can learn if you are, say, looking for a house that is on the Forest Street, you are out of luck for this book. Maybe another book covered this different section, or a different year might have deemed that street to be of more value, but sometimes not. So that's a good way to kind of get a cursory look over to see if your street or your section of your town has information on it or not. However, another tricky thing about using the graphic index is that for this example, it doesn't actually show anything about Hopedale, despite it being part of the Sanborn volume here. If you just go into the graphic index and don't look any further, you may accidentally write off the Sanborn map and say, oh, that's no of use to me, so I guess I'll have to move on to something else. But at the bottom right of the page for the introductory material is, and next slide, the street index. The street index in conjunction with the graphic index is an important thing to look through. A street index is the list of all the streets in alphabetical order. Some of these streets listed here say street name at Hopedale, as shown in the top right screenshot. This is a way for you to know that Aiden Street is Aiden Street in Hopedale. That would be helpful if, say, there's a main street in Hopedale and a main street in Milford. You wouldn't get them confused. Sanborn would do this when they would do a map of multiple areas. It helped deter confusion. It says that it was in sheet 12. Sheet 12 was actually not included in the graphic index, like I said. So now you know, oh, there was more sheets than it was actually indicated in that graphic index. Great, I can actually look some more into this volume. You'll also see in the screenshot below right, if numbers are shown under the street name, it indicates the address range, and it is usually split up on different pages. That's often the case with, say, a central street or a main street. They tend to have a lot of buildings and dwellings, and so to help you find where you are looking, it will break it down for you. But just like how I said the graphic index has its drawbacks, so does the street index. This option isn't always the best route, especially since street names and numbering systems change over time. So it's good to use them together to see if you can find the section of your town that you're looking for. Unfortunately, street names have changed a lot over many decades. So using it, both the map version and also the list version, can really help you find and pinpoint where you're looking for. Next slide, please. Oftentimes, street special indexes are included after the regular street index. This is an index of major buildings, like significant businesses, public buildings, factories. You can see here that there's a laundry, there's a place, there's stores, churches. So this is a great way for you to look up buildings that have likely stayed over the decades, such as a church. And you don't actually have to know their street name or their exact location. This is a great way for you to be able to look up things, as well as know at the time what was considered important and significant, both to the fire insurers, but also likely to the people. So this is kind of a cool snapshot into what was considered significant at the time. And the final thing that I don't have a slide for, because I didn't actually choose a map of multiple volumes. If you have a map that will be shown across multiple volumes, say for New York City, it's a vast place, they needed multiple volumes for it. At the beginning of each volume, there will be a graphic map of the volumes, and very similar to the graphic map I showed before, it'll just show which volume each portion of the city is being covered. So volume 1 would have one section, volume 2, and so on, and then it would go further into the specifics. So with all these in mind, there's also these indexes will then tell you a specific sheet number or page to go to. In the earlier editions, one sheet number was indicated for the 2 pages that lie flat together when the book is open. But as maps developed and became more complex, the sheet numbers were associated with 1 page only. So keep that in mind when you're looking at maps of different years. They might have had a different numbering system. So you might just have to familiarize yourself with that as you're going through. If a sheet number was different from the previous edition, the previous edition's information would be in parentheses below the sheet number in the new edition. So when you're looking at a sheet, the edges of the map will be able to also show the corresponding to the sheet pages that cover the section of the map that's just off to the side. So if you're looking at a map here, and then around would have like 10, 9, and 8 around it. So those are also things to keep in mind when you're looking for specific sheet numbers. So next slide, please. The most, I'd say, I'm gonna do a dad joke, but the key thing to do here is to look at a key and to consult this key. When you're looking at a Sanborn insurance map, the keys will likely have a lot of similarities, but they're not always going to be exactly the same. So looking up each key is critical for you to know what you're looking at and how to interpret the information. You'll notice here, there's 2 keys I chose. The one on the left is the key for the Hopedale map that I used, as well as there is also a similar but much more complex key on the right, which is from the Cambridge map of 1900. This Cambridge key was much more intricate because Cambridge was a much denser and more commercial area, and that was ultimately conceived to be more valuable to Sanborn. So they put a lot more time and effort into that area. So just keep in mind, the basics will likely be the same, but you will have to check to see if there's any discrepancies or more intricacies in what map you're looking at. I also, at this point, want to give you the tip that when you are doing your research online and are using digitized Sanborn maps, say as on the Library of Congress website, I recommend screenshotting it or clipping it out or do whatever you want so that you can then have the key on the corner of your screen or somewhere oriented on your display so that you can easily refer back to the key for those tricky items without having to reload the title page. Especially on the Library of Congress website, it can be a little clunky and slow. So having that screenshot makes it much faster for you to be able to answer a question you may have. Whereas obviously for a physical map, you'll be able to just flip back to that first page of the key. The key is going to cover a lot of different things, and the three main ones I'm going to now go into, and the first one's abbreviations. So next slide. There are a lot of different glossaries out there, and I recommend you looking them up. But my favorite is the California State University Northbridge glossary. I found it to be the most comprehensive. There are some others, and there's one from New York, and you can just Google them. And I find this very helpful because you're going to see a lot of different abbreviations, and you might not necessarily know what they mean. I pulled here some of the most common ones, so you can just kind of try and remind yourself and remember these ones since you'll likely see these. You see D or DWG for dwelling, F is for flat or apartment, store, S is for store, sal is salon. There's also a number in it plus B almost always means that it's the number of stories and a basement. So 2B would be equivalent to 2 stories in a basement. And then PO is for post office. Next slide. Colors always indicate the type of materials used to build the dwelling that you're looking at. So most of the time, it usually means yellow is equivalent to frame, red is for brick, blue is for stone, gray is for iron, brown is for adobe, green is for special. And sometimes you may also see a CL and a circle, and that means it's cloth lined. Next slide, please. The third part that you would learn from a key is the line styles. A solid line means it's a solid wall, and any breaks in it would be indicating of doorways. And then on the top image that I've shown here, this is a screenshot from that Cambridge key that was much more intricate that I had shown a moment ago. You'll see that the information has a lot more details, and you'll have to do a bit more reading to get the meaning behind it. You'll see that red still means brick. Those 3 items shown there are all mean brick. But beyond that, if there's a solid line outside the dwelling, that means there is a brick or metal cornice. Whereas if there's a dotted line outside the building, that will mean that there is a wooden cornice. And then you can also see lines that stick out of the building with 1 to 4 tally lines. These correspond to how many inches out a firewall is built, going at 6-inch increments. So kind of to give you an idea of how it can get a little more complicated as you're going through this key and trying to understand all the different components involved. Similarly, in the Hopedale key, it had some complex window information that took me quite a bit of time to understand. So I wanted to point it out here because this will be something you will likely come across. There are these T's that kind of look like tally marks, and they correspond to a floor of a building. If the tally mark also has a dot at the top, that means that there is a window on that floor. So the example in the middle shows the 3 floors, because there's 3 tally marks, and then with windows on the 1st and 3rd floors, because there's a little dot at the top of each of those tally marks. Also, if these icons have looked like what considered like a parentheses at the bottom, that means that there are shutters on those windows. So All this to go in to say that it can be really tricky to understand the keys, and it's important to go back and frequently return and reread what you're looking at so that you can remember the patterns of the maps you're looking at. Next slide, please. So now I'm actually going to get into the actual reading of a map. For this example, I'm going to be looking at the town center of Hopedale. We're going to be looking first at one street called Eden Street, right below the two blue buildings. If you could click again, actually. Just once, perfect. In that black box there, that's where we're going to start with. Then I'm going to go into the parts shown above in my second and third case studies, but I just wanted to kind of orient you that we're going to start down here. Next slide. So the street information here for Eden Street includes the name of the street, addresses for the buildings on the street, the addresses would be written outside of the building where it is facing the street that it is associated with. Street info also includes the width and elevation. The width would be a number with an apostrophe next to the number, and the elevation would be a number in a circle. So the width here is 50, and you'll see a dotted line splitting the road down the middle. This is not a driving line on the road. It is actually indicating that there is an 8-inch water pipe as described by the 8 parentheses WP. There's also a FA box at the end of the street. If you went and looked up the glossary, that means that there's a fire alarm box. It is one of 8 listed in the introductory section of the Hopedale Sanborn map. So you can count them off over time, but that's one right there. There's also a black dot of TH that is meaning a triple fire hydrant at the end of the street. So these are kind of some of the parts that you can learn just from looking specifically at one little street. One thing that you may have noticed, though, is that there is a house at 25 Eden, but no house at 15, 16, 17, or 18 across the way. The key at the beginning, when you read your keys, it'll likely explain that alternate street numbers are actual, but consecutive street numbers are arbitrary. This essentially just means that sequential numbering systems on Sanborn map sheets were usually arbitrary numbers given to a lot of land by the surveyor when the town did not necessarily have actual street address numbers at the time. So just keep in mind that even though if you're looking for something at 16 Eden, that might not actually be something in existence. It was just an easy way for the surveyors to allot numbers to different lots. All right, next slide. So now I'm going to show you the case studies. The first one here is of these 2 blue buildings. These are the 2 buildings that are right above Eden Street that I was just talking about. And so looking at them, what can we learn? So to start off with, blue indicates that these buildings were made of stone. The one on the right is marked as a Universalist church. There is a 1 in some of the corners, meaning that it is 1 level. It also has a small hollow circle in another corner, meaning it has a slate roof, which I both gathered those from the key. Under the name of the building, it says there are 12 feet to the eaves and that it is still being built. So we just learned something about the Unitarian Church in my hometown. Looking up the church's website by doing some research, I was able to learn that in June of 1897, the Hopedale Unitarian Parish Council met to decide on plans for the church, and it was finished and dedicated of September of 1898. So this map actually showcases it in the middle of it being developed, which is pretty cool. The building across the street is labeled as the town hall. The top right says 2.5, meaning it is 2.5 levels up at the time that this map was created. Dashed lines show the inside was broken up into different usages. You can see that it includes a GRO, or grocery store, a market in the basement, a public library on the first floor, the town offices on the first floor, and a lockup and courtroom in the basement. The front middle was also a PO, or post office. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? Well, the Library of Congress has one other Sanborn map of Hopedale digitized, which was from 1920. So now we can compare the two and see how these two buildings have changed over time. The updated Unitarian Church now has a lot more details and more closely matches what we see today, and now has the layers to the roofs, more details to the wings, and now shows the tower. Across the street, things have moved around inside the town hall as well. The town hall is now on the second floor. The grocer is now in the basement. The post office now takes up a lot more space. And there is still a lockup in the basement, but now there is a stationery in the front of the building. It also now says what levels have windows with those tally marks with the circles at the top. And then next slide says a little fun thing. You can actually see what it looks like when it was being dedicated. So that is what is now was represented in the town hall map shown just a second ago, which is pretty cool. All right, next slide. So I just went over some more bigger usage buildings. Now I'm going to go over some buildings that are just north of what I was just showing you, but they're more dwellings and residential. In 1897, there are tenements at the bottom right. They are made up of wooden frame because they are in yellow. Next to them is a brick building called the Harrison BLK. BLK means block, so this brick indicated by red building is called the Harrison block, which is something I never knew before I started this webinar, to be honest, for the research for this webinar. The Harrison block is a 3-story building holding storage and a cobbler in the basement, a lodge on the 3rd floor, as well as a drugstore, a clubhouse, and a jewelry store in the 1st and 2nd stories. Next door is another grocer, and across the street are a bunch more dwellings. Next slide. By 1920, the whole area looked completely different. The Harrison block is still there, but it now holds a Knights Club and a hall, a drugstore, and a clothing store. The building next door has been renovated to a different layout and now includes a tinware store and a drug and grocery. Behind the Harrison building is a pool and bowling alley, and there's now a town stable and yard, an auto shop, a tool house, or a warehouse, that's what that means. And the building across this street is a combination of the two dwellings that were shown in the last slide. And then you'll see on the screenshot I took from Google Maps that things have changed even more today. The town hall, the church, the Harrison building, and a small little building are all that is currently the same from the earlier setup. The whole block where the combined dwellings were on Draper Street were all torn down to make way for the community house. The area around the Harrison building was changed to make way for a police station and for a parking lot. And the bowling alley is gone, unfortunately, but it is in the community house, so I guess we have that now. And so next slide. One block up from the community house, where I was talking about a second ago, there is Hope Street. This is my final case study, and this is one where you can get a bit more history about a specific individual, which I thought was pretty fun. So over on Hope Street, you can see that there are 4 buildings in 1897, one of which is a small, the really tiny little one, building marked Tobacco, which means tobacco store. I then turned to the 1898 Hopedale Directory, which didn't actually have many addresses listed, just the street names. And here I was able to look by looking up the street names. I found the owner of the tobacco company named William N. Draper, who owned a confectionery, cigars and tobacco store on Hope Street near Dutcher, and a house on 3 Dutcher, which is further down. So we found the owner, and we now know a little bit more about him. But what else can we learn about him? Well, there were newspapers from that time that we can look up. And if you're lucky, you'll be able to find digitized versions of your local newspapers online. If you're not so lucky, You can look at your local library and see if they have microfilm of the historic newspapers that you can then look through within that time frame. My hometown, unfortunately, does not have their local newspaper digitized, but we do actually have a website on the town history, and I was able to find out a bit more about William and Draper from it. So William, also known as Billy, was the owner of the store, which was also called the Billy Draper's Variety Store. Despite the Draper name, which locals considered that synonymous with the town mill and a major corporation in the area, Billy was actually from a different Draper family and not at all related to the more famous Draper family. By 1910, the 1910 town directory then showed me that his business expanded to also be a newsstand, a telephone station, and a laundry agency. So next slide. By then looking at the 1920 Sanborn maps, you can see that his store has expanded in size, likely due to his expansion of his business to include the things I just mentioned, which was a newsstand, a telephone station, and a laundry agency. By 1948, Bill Newell Draper died at the age of 83, and he had been the owner of the shop for 55 years, putting its opening at the early 1890s, which is a few years before our first map, which is pretty cool. So in his obituary, I learned that he was a member of the George Draper Lodge, the K&P at the Harrison Block, and the Unitarian Church. All those kind of sound familiar, right? It seems that he really liked to live and work and reside in his block. So by then knowing the name of the store, I was able to then find out that the store went through a bunch of owners over the years and even a major fire in the 1960s. But in the end, it was torn down in 2016 to make way for parking, unfortunately. So all this for final takeaways. These 3 case studies show how you can learn more about your local history, the genealogy, or the building history of your home, as well as to see how things have evolved within your town, both the state with which, say, your town hall had a bunch of different things in it, as well as the town hall's main purpose, as well as you can see how things have developed, which is really cool. So these are all the different ways you can approach and use the keys as well as external resources to start building and learning more about your local area. So that's it for me.
Great. We'll do questions in just a second. We've got, I forgot to put like upcoming webinars. So the upcoming webinars that we have, we're doing more product, less process. We're doing one on DAX. So just a lot of archival terms are coming up. And then Brittany is going to do one on disaster planning in October. And I forget what we just agreed on for September, but we just added a couple more and they'll be on the website. We are recording this webinar and we post them to our YouTube channel. This will be up sometime tomorrow. And then we have some time for questions. I'm going to cut us off at the hour. And if you have a comment, please hold it for our YouTube channel, because if you have something you want to share or an anecdote, you can leave it there as well as links in the comments there. But if anybody has a question, we don't have a chat, so you can unmute or use the raise hand function. So what part of Massachusetts is Hopedale in? It's kind of a square, right? So
Hopedale is in the southern central part of Massachusetts, right near the border with Rhode Island.
Okay, cool.
Near Foxborough, if anyone likes to watch football, the Foxborough Stadium for the Patriots is like 20 minutes away.
Yeah. So again, we'll put the recording up on YouTube, and you feel free to put comments or questions there if we don't have any questions tonight.
I probably missed it, but where did you get the name for the individual when you were able to find the houses? I probably just missed when you said it. I'm so sorry.
No worries. I went pretty quick because I had a lot to get through. So I looked up the town directory for the year of I think it was the 1897 directory. But my town had produced a directory for the area, and that would list each individual name as well as where they lived. So I looked up based off of looking up where the street names, and then I was able to pinpoint that on a very small street such as Hope Street with only 4 dwellings, I was able to determine that the tobacco that was mentioned in his directory entry was owned by then that Draper man, because he was the only one who would have a tobacco store on a street with 4 buildings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions this evening? All right. Well, we'll wrap it there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, I will email out the recording pretty soon.